I don't know very much about Zona and Ed's relationship. They were really pretty private about it. I know a couple of things. And Ed did tell some stories. This one was a private story. But we were having a serious discussion about suicide once. Because when you're up against something that the world doesn't seem to give a rat's ass about, suicide sometimes comes to mind. And Ed said that when he left the hospital, he had polio the same year I was born. So he was 14. When he left the hospital, he wanted to kill himself. And he was just trying to figure out ways to get enough accommodations, he didn't call them that, but to get enough help so that he could figure out how to kill himself, because he was too disabled to do it. And his mom, Zona, was the person who stepped in and said, no, that's not going to be the way this is going to go. You have to at least try to see what you can do. Towards the end of his life, in fact, the last time I saw him, which was, I think, on his birthday, the year he died, we had lunch and we were talking about something, and I was getting really deep into disability advocacy and how, you know, your parents are your enemy and you got to really understand that you got to stay away from your parents and not be paternalistic and blah, blah, blah. And I knew that Ed shared a house with his mom. I mean, his mom had the house and he had a mother-in-law's apartment in the back. And I just asked him, how come you live with your mom? And he said, because we love each other, which I thought was pretty cool. And I think that's why most people with disabilities live with their parents. And he said he trusted his mom to be there when everybody else walked away. And that's really something if you need a tube in your mouth in order to breathe. You really want to make sure that somebody's going to be there when everybody else walks away. So I got to know Zona a little bit after he died. She was in Minneapolis for an award that he was given after he died, and we had dinner together and went to see the Prairie Home Companion. And the cool thing is she had a great sense of humor and I think a great sense of humanity. She was also very clear about what she thought about various choices that he made in his life and that she didn't approve of. But you could see them having conversations about that rather than her trying to control him. She would just argue with him. And that's a pretty honorable way to have disagreements with someone in your family, instead of trying to control them and trick them into doing things the way you want it done. She would just argue, and it was still his choice, which was pretty cool. I think, too, that, I don't know how to put this. I got in trouble doing some parent training when I talked to people about how important it was to get good psychological counseling. As a parent, I think you get a lot of crappy counseling. You go out and you say to somebody, well, I think I might be depressed. I had 3 therapists in a row tell me, well, of course you're depressed, you have a kid with a disability. That was what was expected. And then I finally found a therapist who said, well, of course you're depressed, you're Norwegian. And then I knew I had a therapist that I could talk to. Anyway, I used to talk to folks about this because I thought sometimes we try to do this alone. And once when I sort of got in trouble with some people for mentioning therapy, which they thought was the medical model, Ed came to my defense and he said, look, my mom is a family therapist. That's what she does. It's really important work. It's important to help families figure out how they're going to deal with something that they weren't expecting to deal with. It doesn't have to be a medical model. It doesn't have to be about, oh, here's this deficit in your family. It can just be about how am I going to learn to deal with all this rejection in my community, or how am I going to learn to deal with the huge stress of being awake most of the night and having to work most of the day. You know, those are real things. And to say that you might need a counselor to deal with some of that is pretty real. And Ed was really proud of his mother's work with families. He was really proud of it. Again, I know Zona was a big advocate and made a big difference in systems, but for Ed, I think what really mattered is the way that she reached out personally and worked with families in a one-to-one way and sort of helped them get a grip on what was going on in their own life. I think that's probably the model for the way he worked. He would freak if somebody said he was a therapist, but oh well.